There we are. So perfect. It's my absolute pleasure to host this morning's webinar where we will be discussing agility and strategic planning. Through the session, we have our guest speaker, Kate Keane. She's a lecturer at Canterbury Christchurch University Business School, and we will explore how to deal with uncertainty and complexity and develop the planning skills that you need for your business. Today's event is being held in partnership with the GradForce team. And GradForce work exclusively with underrepresented groups within Canterbury Christchurch University. So to ensure that when students leave university, they have equal opportunities to transition into employment. The work they do is fantastic. So if you are thinking about employing, please do get in touch with the team. Amber's here today. So please do feel free to drop her a message or ask any questions if you want to stick behind after the event. I think that's all from me for now. I will now hand over to today's speaker, Kate.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you, Molly. Thank you for the introduction. Good to see you all here this morning. Hopefully the session we're going to go through will resonate. I'm sure many of you are facing situations within your sort of business environments, whether you're a sort of owner operator or whether you're working for a sort of medium-sized enterprise or perhaps part of an institution or government agency. I know we've got quite a sort of span of attendees this morning, so hopefully you'll all find something in this that resonates with you within those operating environments. Just to introduce myself first. Now, my background's not necessarily typical for somebody working in academia, but increasingly so, and certainly within the Christchurch University Business School. I have a background in practice, in industry. I've come through, spent a number of years working in projects and operations for an investment bank before moving into working for what were then regional development agencies. Does everyone remember those? Doing some work with the Women's Enterprise Task Force, amongst other grant-funded programs, and then subsequently moved into major projects, infrastructure investment at Network Rail. So a mixture of different sectors in my background. I've been working here at Christchurch Business School for at least associated for the past 3 to 4 years. And my sort of areas of teaching are really in the postgraduate and the professional arenas, and strategy is usually a mainstay of what I teach, as well as project management and change management. So a bit of background on me. Obviously, I have, as I go through the presentation, you'll see that there are some leanings towards, you know, what are the thought processes, what is happening in terms of some of the major thinking around complexity, particularly given the situation that we faced with the COVID pandemic in the last 12 to 14 months. I want to give you a flavour of what some of the big consultancy firms are thinking and talking about in terms of the research that they've conducted around how we manage complexity and how we deal with uncertainty. And from that, how do we develop strategy when we don't know what's happening ourselves and what the next step might be? So unfortunately, it is a lot of me talking today, but what I would hope is that as I'm talking, you have some paper by your side. You may use a notebook. If you've got some blank sheets of paper, you've got pens, and you are starting to map out and think about what the content of today's talk is telling you or making you think in terms of what action you need to take within your own organizations. And that's the idea. So this is about a tool set, and at the end of it, we'll move on to sort of what that tool set might look like that you can take away and use. So let's take you through the different areas I want to talk about. So I'm going to start, as I said, with strategy, planning and complexity. What does that mean? And what do we do with that? Agile, the second part, there's always a lot of talk about agile organizations. How do you make your organization agile? You know, what are the processes involved in agile management, and how does that fit with adaptability? Always a lot of buzzwords. Just try and make a little bit of sense around some of those. And then we're going to move into the importance of collaboration as an approach, and how you use collaboration to start mapping out strategy. And finally, we're going to talk about the business model canvas. I can't see the chat, and I think there is a chat screen, so let me just make sure. Oh yeah, Molly's put something in there. Molly, if there's anybody in the chat and I've missed it, then please flag that up to me, because I'm on full screen at the moment, so I can't see it. So
I will do.
Thank you. So any questions as I go through, please pop those in there. Any observations as I go through, because in making those observations and you applying and thinking, it will enable you to make the most of the session, I think. So this is all about thinking and what action we're going to take away. So the business model canvas, for those of you who have encountered this before, is a visual, simplistic approach to understanding the business model that we're working with. And I want to talk about that today, because I certainly, from my own experience, have found it to be really important to understand what our business model is and what our value proposition is, in order for us to be able to create strategy. And often organizations have a vision, a mission, a grand vision sometimes. Some of the bigger, you hear about some of the tech companies at the moment, and you hear of things like, the big sports manufacturers. You talk about people like Nike, Just Do It, whatever. These are their this is their vision and their mission. But when we're talking about strategy, we're really talking about, how do we map activity? How do we make that vision, that aspiration into a reality? And this doesn't matter whether you're a small a business, or even an owner operator. It's just you need, in terms of delivering value to your customers, whoever they may be, or if it's you're working internally within a large business, then perhaps it's your clients or your internal clients. But thinking about how you create value and thinking about how you're going to deliver that. And that's really what strategy is. And strategy can be really simple. There's a lot of management talk around strategy. And in essence, it's about a series of steps, how you're going to get from one point to the next over a period of time, how you're going to make that happen, and to support your vision that you have for your own company or your own role in a business. So that's our agenda for today. That's it. Okay, so a crisis presents a choice. The COVID pandemic has affected everybody. So whether it's in a personal capacity, whether it's in your professional capacity, or whether it's in your sort of business capacity, business operating environment. And when we've had and been through something that has been a crisis, things change, and largely everybody has been affected in some way, shape or form. So we are then presented with making some choices, and that may be choices around temporary operating conditions that have come into play. Do we want to continue with those? Do we want to revert back to how we operated our business or conducted our business prior to the start of the pandemic? As our world starts to unlock, lockdown starts to ease, and we're progressing into a state of what we would probably recognise as near normality. Are we going to have we done some things that are going to stick? What's going to stick? What are we going to adapt and incorporate into our strategy going forward? And what have we learned, really? I mean, much of this is about learning. If you can take learning opportunities from a crisis situation, and if you've been part of a business that has pivoted, has moved from operating face-to-face to operating online, even as simple as that, your teams perhaps were all co-located in an office and are now have been remote for some period of time. What elements are you going to take from that to support your strategy going forward? What do you think your business is going to look like now in 6 months' time? If you look at today, you look at a year ago, you look at 6 months ago, you look at a year ago, we should be similarly in a position where we're starting to look forward. And I'm sure many of you are already in this position. So, and as we're looking forward to 6 months, and a year in terms of your business planning cycles, what is it in terms of activity that your business is going to need to focus on? And I'm going to pause for a minute there just to let you write. And it may only be 3 things. It could just be 3 elements. What do you think it's going to look like in 6 months' time? Is it going to look better than today? Are you seeking an increase in your customer base, or are you seeking to generate better revenue from the customers that you already engage with? And if you're part of an organization that perhaps is more mission orientated, how are you going to be working with the new partners and the new arrangements that you've had in place during the past 12 months? How are you going to create a new future with those other organizations going forward? Perhaps lots of questions, but start to write down on your piece of paper, in your notebook, what are some of the questions that you're asking yourself about your business now, and how are you going to translate those aspirations, that learning, that experience into elements of your business strategy going forwards. And guess what? It's complicated out there. I mean, it was complicated before the pandemic. Let's face it, the business environments we're all working in have been subject to change. And often we can all talk about change, and there can quite often be some negative connotations with change. It's change for the sake of change. We're always changing. We never know where we are at any point in time. And the change has become a constant in terms of business strategy and in terms of the way in which businesses are approaching the future. So when we talk about complicated, we talk about what we're really talking about is a number of different elements that we're all dealing with. So it could be, when looking to the future, we are seeing technology that's changing constantly. We're seeing delivery platforms, we're seeing products, the change in the way in which we access products, the way in which products are supplied to us, or the way in which if we're part of a supply chain, the way in which we supply those products onwards into our customer bases. There's different demands, and those demands can seem increasingly complex and interconnected. But with that complexity can come some opportunity. And the quote that I've got on screen here, and I said I'm going to use some thinking from some of the business researchers and business analysts. And Harvard Business School is no different than the Harvard Business Review. For those of you who've come across it before, is a publication that has a lot of academic or thought leadership involved in it, but it tends to have some practical elements which are around how we take these big concepts and these the complexity of the business operating environments and how we translate that into some models or frameworks that we can use practically within operating environments. So apologies for some of the quotes and quotations, but yeah, this is our evidence. This is the research that's out there. We decide, as yourselves as business owners, operators, and employees will decide how to utilize those. So a little bit more management, a little bit more speak. I mean, I don't know if anybody's heard about VUCA before, heard the phrase VUCA. It's even evolving from VUCA. So when we talk about complexity in business operating environments, the speed and pace at which business research is changing is also gives us a good idea of the backdrop of what's happening. So the VUCA term, really, it's been around for a number of years. It comes out of the military. A lot of business strategy, design, focus, or perhaps trigger points have origins in the military, which is interesting. I think that much of that is around, and I talked before about how strategy and business strategy is about the creation of the plan. How are we going to tackle it? And similarly, certainly historically, over the last 30 years to 40 years, a lot of talk around a business and how businesses compete and how businesses become successful has been in terms of competition and how does competition operate. And the competitive forces, you know, do you decide to compete on a basis of price? Are you going to compete on the basis of volume? Are you going to compete on the basis of, you know, some uniqueness about your product or service that you're offering? But what has emerged, certainly since the late 1990s and really took off sort of post 9/11, was this idea that the environments in which businesses are operating are volatile, uncertain, complex, and have a large degree of ambiguity. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was when we talk about complexity and tackling or taming complexity so that we have some certainty. We perhaps are dealing ever increasingly with environments where certainty is difficult to establish. So therefore, how are we going to change the ways in which we operate? How is our strategy going to change, and how is our operating model going to change such that we are able to manage the volatility, uncertainty, and perhaps to position ourselves to take advantage of that? So what does it mean? Volatility. Anyone's familiar with volatility at the moment? Disruptions in terms of things like supply chain could be significant, for example. Some sort of differences in the economic operating environment, and the pace at which that change can happen. So therefore, you predicting as a sort of business planner, being able to predict it becomes a little more difficult. I can see there's some chat in there, so I think that. Okay, nothing, no questions for me. Okay, good, I'll keep moving on. So uncertainty, I mean, lack of predictability. It used to be the case going back in time, and there's elements of this that's still true now. I don't think everything has changed entirely, but you know, if we were looking to the future, if we were planning the next 6 to 12 months, we may say, well, what happened last year and what happened the year before? And that's going to be really difficult. If we look forward in the next year and try and predict what's going to happen based on this last 12 months alone, it's going to be difficult. So accepting that this uncertainty is there, we need to come up with new ways of looking to the future and understanding how we are going to deliver value. So the complexity brings difficulty in decision making. If we are talking about making decisions based on our understanding of our operating environment, but the operating environment has become kind of, you know, quite opaque. It's difficult to tell. It's difficult to tell what competitors are doing, and perhaps through the last 12 months, there's been a move towards working with competitors, and we're going to come on and talk a little bit more about that a bit later on in the session, because working with competitors is increasingly part of taming that complexity. So ambiguity, hard to see. I talked about lack of transparency. Ambiguity, same thing. What's driving everything? What's making the consumer make decisions? And if that's moving quickly, how are you going to make sense of that and plan, essentially? So let's move on, next slide. That's it. Being a little impatient with my slide set here. Okay, there we go. So when we talk, and again, sorry, apologies for the busyness of this slide. This is something that you can take a look at as I'm talking and maybe make some notes on. But this particular diagram in business consultancy, particularly, and therefore perhaps in business research, there's often this grid format. Let me just get my pointer up if I can. See if I can get this to work. So yeah, so we often find this for the 4-grid format. A Johari window approach, there's all sorts of terms that are used to it, but it can be useful of trying to make sense, because when I'm talking about a term like VUCA, I can sort of hear everybody thinking, and I often do this myself, what does that really mean? What does that mean for me? How do I interpret this, and how do I come up with some understanding around it? So if we are talking about And the grids here will show you something about it. So how much do you know about the situation? Do you know not very much? Or do you know a lot about the current situation that you're placed in or your business is placed in? And on the left-hand side here is how well can you predict the results of your actions? So as a business owner or a business leader, you make a decision. How sure can you be that what you predict is going to happen is going to happen? So what we are talking about is an increasing amount of knowledge along the bottom and an increasing predictability up the side. So if you were to take, for example, volatility here in the top right, volatility is about where you are faced with a situation where you might know quite a lot about it, and there's some predictability. So for example, the example given here is about how prices fluctuate after a natural disaster, something that we're living through, I consider still at the moment, but that perhaps takes one of your main suppliers offline. So if the supplier disappears, how are you going to plan for that eventuality? How are you going to be looking ahead and saying, well, if this happens, if suddenly the price of a material becomes very much more expensive because it's scarcer, because one of the suppliers has gone, how do you prepare for that as in business? So you're looking for example, to perhaps something like stockpiling. So stockpiling inventory increase is expensive. So it's got to be proportionate to risk. And you as the business leader or owner have to assess what that risk, is it worth investing in that? Is there a different opportunity? So it's about making these decisions and educated decisions. If you were thinking about you're faced with a situation that's quite ambiguous. So i.e. you are looking, you've been through the last 12 months, some of your core customer base has disappeared, gone somewhere else. How do you either bring them back, attract them back, or do you jump into a new market? Do you do something different? And therefore in the approach here, how do you plan for that? How do you understand sort of cause and effect? Do you come up with a hypothesis? Do you say, well, if I open for, if I have longer operating hours, for example, if you're in retail, if I open in the evenings, is that going to make a difference? I've expanded my online shop and my online delivery methods. Is that now going to shrink back? I've invested money in a new delivery partner, or I've invested in software. How am I going to make best use of that asset? So, and similarly, there's approaches you can take to uncertainty on that and complexity. And for each of these elements, it's about understanding scenarios. So we're talking about scenarios. So when you sit down, if it's just yourself, get a critical friend, or get a business partner, or someone else, someone like the Chambers, or if you're a membership of any other organisations. Using other people to help you think about these scenarios and map out scenarios is really useful. And I'm going to look at, in a second, I've got some detail on how you might progress that and how you should look at scenarios over what sort of time frame. But thinking about scenarios and then planning the approach that you would take should that eventuality come about. And some of that will be around sort of protective approaches, protecting the business. But similarly, for every element of this that occurs, there's also usually some opportunity in how you're going to identify that. And it's always better in a group. It's always better with more than one. And we can all sit and sort of sweat over trying to understand different scenarios, and it can become overwhelming. So I'd always urge people to don't create too many scenarios. Let's look at some positive scenarios and negative scenarios, and as part of your planning, plan an approach as to how you will deal or exploit changes that happen as a result of those scenarios. Okay, probably making you dizzy with my laser pointer. Apologies, let's get that switched on. Okay, so lots of terminology out there. Now, I'll often read or I'll watch videos, I'll hear people go to talks, hear people presenting on different aspects of the agile workplace and what what we should all be doing. We should all be more agile. What we're doing should be agile. I wanted to just highlight some sort of key differences that I see in some of this terminology. So when we're talking about agility, this is about you and your business team, your business unit, or your entire organization. This is about how agility is about how you respond. How well placed are you to take action in response to the scenarios, for example, that you're mapping out? How do you spot or measure the risk associated with making quick decisions? And we've all been required to make quick decisions. And when you reflect on that, and it's always useful in business, there's often not opportunity to reflect. It's quite difficult to sit down and look back and say, well, in the last 6 months, what the things that didn't work so well. It's fine. We're often quite good at assessing those negative ones, but also what worked well. Where did we make a decision quickly and take a risk, and where did that work? Where did that risk that we took and that quick response that we made, where did that pay off? And capture some of your learning around that. What did you do differently, and how could you replicate that again? So it's about an organizational mindset. We often talk about at the Agile workplace, but it often is not necessarily about the actions themselves, but about how your people and your teams are best placed to respond to those. I think many organizations thought perhaps they weren't particularly agile previously, and my own employer included, but we've found lots of agile decision-making opportunities, and in a situation of crisis and that's extremely fast-moving, we've made decisions, and decisions have somehow felt easier. I don't know if anybody else has found that too. So whereas before we would agonize over making a change or introducing something new, we perhaps have gone to, introducing it in a week. Something we thought, perhaps the move to online, I couldn't sell, retail online, I'll make that at some point, it's a big investment. Well, all of a sudden it became a priority and it was actioned, and lots of organizations have benefited from being able to make decisions quickly. So adaptability, you'll hear phrases like adaptable change. How adaptable is your organization? And from my perspective, certainly adaptability is about what you actually do. So if agility is about being set up to respond, your response plan, adaptability is what you do in practice. What changes do you make? What happens in actuality? What happens in your organization? What have you done differently, and how quickly, having made the decisions, having behaved in an agile fashion, how quickly did you adapt? And then finally, down here at the bottom is what we call the big A, Agile. So Agile working practices. This is much more about, and sometimes things get confused and conflated, but sort of Agile project management. And I come from a project management background, as I mentioned earlier. So Agile project management is a set of approaches and methodologies that has its own language. So you'll hear people talking about sprints and iterative planning cycles. And for those of you who, iterative is a word that's out there. Iterative, it just means going back over it again. It means returning to it. It's not just a one-off. You don't do this exercise once and put it away on the shelf. You keep returning to it. Apologies for that, my sound's on. So you keep returning to it. And Agile project management has a whole set of methodologies and approaches associated with it. And I mentioned sprints already, working in planning cycles, and things called scrums, which are really all about, instead of a project plan or a plan for change being documented at the start of a project and then it sort of sitting on a shelf somewhere, Agile project management is about constantly returning to the actions, the activities. And for that, you might use, there's software out there that people use. I know a lot of IT, I don't know if anybody on here today comes from a tech background, but using software products like Jira and some of those, and even Slack and some of those other tools are really about creating a structure for managing Agile projects. And sure, those can be adopted for operating practices. I mean, there's no reason why not. And I'm a great believer in borrowing. So if you find an element of a methodology or approach like Agile project management, and you think, well, actually, I'm a small, I'm a small organization. There's just a few of us to implement a big agile project. Structure doesn't really make sense. I'm just going to perhaps borrow iterative planning cycles, take that element and make sure that if you have a plan at the start of a week, the plan gets returned to the following week. Again, it's about keeping these things live and relevant. Okay, I'm going to go over these fairly quickly, but again, I wanted to come up with some more visuals because I'm a great believer in diagrams. When we're talking about concepts like strategy and business planning, it can all get very word heavy. But if you are able to, as you're sitting there now, draw out, a cycle. For instance, here we've got on the left, this came from McKinsey, one of the large international consulting firms who produce an awful lot of research on businesses and business thinking. But if you're able to map out some steps that you need to take in terms of the strategy for your organization, how are you going to, what's your aspiration here at the top? If you're responsible for designing that aspiration, if you're the leader of your business, what are you going to be telling people? This is where we want to be. Get everybody together. It's always better in groups. How are we going to test out whether this is the right way to go? What are we going to do in terms of piloting? And what's the time frame we're working in? Are we just going to pilot quickly next week? Let's just give it a go. It might not be 100% there, but that way we can understand whether or not it's workable and what elements are workable. And then how we're going to translate these pilots and this thinking about our aspiration into a blueprint. And I said we're going to come on a bit later to talk about business models, but really your business model is your blueprint for how you're going to operate and deliver strategy. So in thinking about this blueprint, there's some elements and some steps you can take. So if you're drawing now, understand, do you know where value is created in your industry you're currently operated in? And when I'm talking about value, it's about either if you're mission orientated, it's about how you're delivering value for your clients or your patients if you're in the health sector. And do you understand what value is that they're looking for or they need from you? If you're in a commercial organization, you quite often understand, we talk in terms of things like turnover, revenue, profit, and in amongst all those terms is something that is the value that your organization collects and takes away. So an exercise that some of the large corporates do, and this certainly translates well into smaller organizations, is defining your value streams. And the business model canvas that we're going to look at later will help you think about some of those. So when we talk about value streams, we're talking about, do you understand, when you create something, what is the real cost of that creation? And often if you're an owner-operator, it's things like factoring in your time, particularly when you're going through startup phases, can be really difficult because you are, you're everything. So identifying the value and identifying where those value points are, how can you make them more agile? If you're a small organization, I would suggest you're probably fairly agile already, but it becomes more complicated the more an organization grows. So if you do have many departments and you're just leading a business unit in amongst other departments, how do you work together to understand what the value is across the organization and mapping it out? Do a diagram. We start here, we end up here. And this is what McKinsey outlined as being a sort of journey that if you're looking to make your organization more agile, these are some of the elements you need to think about. You need to have your team set up correctly and defining missions. Is everybody working the same way? Are we looking the same direction? Doesn't need to be complex, but it does need to be able to move and change quickly. Sometimes difficult when we're looking at organizations that have sort of very clear, perhaps siloed ways of working. But some of those will have disappeared in the last year in the operating environment we've all been in. So all of this leads through to creating your sort of roadmap roadmap again is a really kind of an overused term, but I like to think of it as being this is visual. If you've got it mapped out visually, it's easy to share and it's easy for everybody who's participating in that to understand. If you have a roadmap, then what you're looking at is making sure that your strategic priorities are simplified and reduced, and we're going to come on to talk a little bit about the importance of doing that. Okay, anyone got any questions? Pop those in the chat. I think there's a lot of words and diagrams coming at you this morning, so I think that what would make me really happy is if everybody's sitting here now surrounded by pens and paper with lots of diagrams mapping out, because this is all usable. This is all usable stuff and relevant. Okay. Make sure no questions. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, there we go. And as I mentioned earlier about this sort of idea of scenario planning, when we're trying to deal with what's a sort of volatile, complex operating environments, being able to look ahead and think about some scenarios and think about how we might manage those scenarios is a very useful exercise. Lots of you may be familiar with doing this already. It may be a demand of your employer, but if you're in a smaller organization, you're responsible for leadership in a smaller organization, spending some time now as we start to emerge from the difficulties of perhaps lockdown, which has impacted some organizations. It's impacted everybody, but some organizations to a greater or lesser degree. Thinking about the horizons ahead, so looking over time. And these horizons, this diagram looks vague at first sight, and it's almost deliberately vague. So what we're talking about here is you set these, what's a short time period in your industry, in your sector you're working in, what's a long period, time period. And if you're looking ahead to the horizon, if a year is a long time because things are fast moving and changing, or is 5 years a long time? I mean, I'm talking about my own institution, talking about some of the institutions I've worked with before. We typically would have a 5-year plan, and some of that's around finance cycles and so on. So if that's the horizon that your organization works with, then that's the time period you're going to apply. But you're going to look at operational objectives in the shorter time. In the midterm, you're going to look at tactical objectives. And in the long term, we're talking about strategic goals at that point, and that's what you'll be planning for in your own strategies. Not forgetting this element here, not forgetting that we're looking at to create value. So profitability, if that is the driver in your for your sector or organization.
Hi, Kate. We've just had a question here in the chat. I hope it's okay to...
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Rosie just said, can you explain a little more about the concept of scrums? Is it brainstorming for scenarios?
Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, thank you, Rosie. Good question. Scrums, the function that scrums ordinarily perform, and this again is subject to some interpretation. I've seen it done slightly differently in different places. The concept of a scrum is that it is perhaps what some people call a stand-up meeting. In the Agile planning environment, it's a daily, perhaps a half-hour meeting where everybody who's involved in the delivery meets, virtually at the moment, and talks about what are the key elements of their delivery that need to happen that day. What happened yesterday? What's happening today? It's a very swift check on how things are progressing, and it doesn't work in a sort of, it's not like your meetings where you have a chair and you have somebody. This is a very swift meeting. It's almost a checkpoint in the project as it's happening, and quite often you'll hear something called a Scrum Master. That's a role which usually just defines what you and I perhaps might call a facilitator, but somebody who leads that meeting, but leads it from a perspective of ensuring that it's quick, it focuses on risk, challenges, whatever your project has set out as priorities, but they're daily, quick get together. Some companies operate, perhaps will make it a weekly meeting, but in the true Agile sense, it's a daily happening, and it allows you to reiterate and revisit the plan before progressing each time. So this is where the plan's very live and relevant. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. I can
Rosie.
see that Rosie's just said a thank you in the chat as well. We've had one more question. Would you prefer to wait for the end?
No, it's absolutely fine. Go ahead. I'd rather as people come up, and then it also means that it's a break from slides, too many PowerPoints.
So it's one here from Steph. She says, hi, Kate. In your opinion, do you think that all staff should be considering or at least understanding Horizon 3?
Yeah, Steph. Okay, good question. I mean, I think I consider Horizon 3 to be kind of our strategic objectives. This is the direction of travel. So even if it's just at a high level, I think that Horizon 3 represents the goal you're heading towards. So I think from a strategy planning point of view, if your short and mid-term objectives are building to Horizon 3, then I think that staff, it should be something they're considering. Perhaps the relevancy over time becomes more important. But if we're not, it's all sort of that question. If what we're doing now is not contributing to our sort of overall Horizon 3, the direction of travel, then you have to say, why are we doing it? So it's a good question, Steph. I think that within organizations, having a simplified Horizon 3, perhaps, I mean, often, and again, I will come back to my own organization, we have quite a large document that represents our direction of travel. But if from that you can tease out some 2 or 3 sort of key elements in terms of those goals, then, and get everybody understanding that, I think it will be sort of the mantra that should underpin what they're doing from a tactical and a operational perspective.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Steph.
It looks like there's one more here from Rosie. Said, I would also like to ask about working with competitors. When I suggest this as a strategy in my projects, it is very difficult to promote or justify to others. How can I compel change?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I'm going to come to talk in a minute about how, and I've got an example, and perhaps everybody out there, I mean, if anyone else has got some examples that would support Rosie on this as well, I think it's useful to talk about examples of where other organisations have done this successfully. And I think that we're starting to build a number of these examples, and I can certainly think of some in retail that have been really successful, and they've been successful principally because we're just going to talk about collaboration, but because people have been able to put to one side this idea that it's sort of a race to the bottom. If there's a limited customer base out there, we're working with other people, we're competing. We'll get to a point where we, if we can only compete on price in the end or volume, we're starting to, our margins are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So, how can you create a different value set? And there's a big, I'm going to come back to books and stuff, sorry. Anybody who's heard of Red Oceans and Blue Oceans, this was a book that was written by René and Morborn, and basically what they were talking about was looking at examples of organizations that, instead of staying in this sort of red ocean, this very competitive ocean where we're all running after the same customers, trying to price similarly, price matching or price reducing, perhaps we should be looking to just create a blue ocean. So and the example they worked with there, and unfortunately this organization doesn't exist anymore, but that's a symptom of, I think, of the last 12 months. But they looked at Cirque du Soleil and said, well, hang on a minute, Cirque du Soleil, circus was not something that anybody really considered anymore, or perhaps, it was very localized and wasn't an entertainment, didn't feature widely in sort of the entertainment industry. And Cirque du Soleil said, well, we think, we can create a market where it doesn't exist at the moment. We can bring people, and they were hugely successful as a global organization. But there are some examples of that at local level too. I think about an example even with Canterbury Christchurch, and Canterbury Christchurch partnered with the University of Kent to create the Kent and Medway Medical School, which opened just in this academic year. And that was a huge partnership. And typically we would be considered perhaps, and I know it's not a commercial environment, we're considered to be competitors. You know, we're competing for, we run programs of education, and we're looking to attract from the same client base, as it were. So working together, we've created something that we perhaps couldn't have done individually. And in working together, we've unlocked additional value. We found ways in which we can grow the market instead of competing within the same restricted market. Working in combination, we've grown the market and created a new offering, as it were. So that can also be helpful. Certainly examples are good for that. And I see Sally Ann, thank you, Sally Ann, my fix and Harbour Arm shopping centres of companies working together. Yeah, and I think that collaborative working, and that's just what I was going to come on to talk about. So it's a great segue into that. So when we're thinking about complexity, thanks for those questions. If anyone has anything else, please pop them in, and Molly will it can interrupt me. Feel free to do that. So how do we overcome? So we know we're dealing with this complex business environment. We know that we're, just time checking myself there. We know that we're in a situation where perhaps things that were predictable are no longer predictable. And so therefore, what do we do about this? How do we work differently and start to be able to make use of others around us, and working in collaboration and collaborative working practice has been seen to be a way in which you can achieve some sort of a strategic direction that allows you to grow markets. Because guess what, if you've got limited resources, limited finances, being able to adapt and act quickly and in an agile fashion is very difficult on your own, particularly if you're talking about, well, new markets open up, how quickly can I mobilize, you know, my staff of 4, myself, so and so. Well, but hang on, what do we do? What about if we look at who else is out there who might be looking at this also? Can we come together? Do they have resources? Do I have something to offer them? Do they have something to offer me? So these kind of reciprocal arrangements that can grow the markets and grow your skill set through, instead of some sort of natural or organic growth, you're talking about a sort of designed growth through partnership. So collaboration is seen very much as a way of addressing uncertain and complex operating environments. And the examples that were given in the chat of the way in which retail organisations are starting to work together, and has certainly, there's lots of them out there, and I'm going to come and talk to you in a minute. Let me just move on about how we simplify strategy so that we're able to collaborate. Because often, and I talked about large volume strategic plans and strategic frameworks that look enormous. So how do we, particularly as the sort of smaller organizations or mid-sized organizations, how do we simplify strategy so that it's usable? And if we're looking ahead on the 3 horizons, if we're looking to the future, how do we translate that so that all of our teams understand what that means and are using it as their sort of their blueprint in their minds when they're developing or working with customers and developing new offerings? So lots of collaborative execution, fewer initiatives. I'm going to come on the next slide to talk about how we look at initiatives and what do we include, because often when we sit down to design strategy, you know, the world's our oyster. We could do a million things. You know, there's all these opportunities out there. How do we create a funnel? How do we start to stream that down into a few initiatives that are the ones that are really going to create value? And not only that, we need to make sure that all of our teams own them, and that's only possible if you've got a fewer number. Large documents, people are busy, they're not going to spend time, it's not going to be in the back of their minds as that blueprint. And we need to look to refresh and review on a constant basis, maybe not on a Scrum basis, but perhaps on something that looks more like a Scrum, so that the relevancy is ensured. So again, apologies, another what looks like first glance a terrifying diagram that the Harvard Business Review have come up with. However, sometimes in these diagrams there's some simplicity that strikes a chord with us. So when we're thinking about strategy and our strategic priorities, what the Harvard Business Review, and this is a very recent, this is their latest publication, I found this a few weeks ago, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because I looked at it and thought, well, yeah, this makes sense, because every time we're talking about strategic initiative, we need to be making sure that the things that are in that plan, because we're busy, we need to be agile. We don't want lots and lots of strategic initiatives that are not creating value. So we need to be very clear about strategic priorities, those that make it into our plan, into our Horizon 3, into our business model, have to be those that create value. And we need to be able to, as business leaders and owners, to understand what that value looks like. So this particular diagram here, and I've not spent a lot of time with this, and it's the first time I've talked about it, so I have to bear with me. But what the Harvard Business Review was saying is that, in an article, is that, you know, the problem that organizations or companies face is that we have intensifying competitive pressures and challenges. And as a result of that, we're all asking more and more of our employees, or if we're an employee ourselves, we're getting more and more asked of us, more and more needs to happen. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but in the last 12 months, it has felt like a Herculean effort to keep juggling everything that we've been juggling. So so what they're proposing is an approach, and they're saying it's the responsibility of business leaders. And certainly if you're a business owner, you would definitely want this to be part of your responsibility for because you're interested in making your organization a success. So what needs to happen is we need to be selecting fewer initiatives, but making sure those initiatives have the greatest impact. And sometimes getting a sort of values-based strategy requires us to look all through our organization, and instead of just focusing on sales and growing the customer base, it might be there's other elements that are creating value for us, and we need to make sure that we're looking across all of our organizations to capture those. And if a strategic initiative is to make it into the plan, if it's considered to be of importance, it needs to do one of the following things. It needs to create value for the customers. So when we're looking at this area here, not only have we got the customer price, but we've also got something beyond that called customer delight, which is a phrase I quite like. So this is where we're talking about where a customer has paid a price for something and considers that they have got something which is of good value. So it gives them something beyond just the monetary value that they've exchanged. It gives them, you know, it has a design element that they really like. It has a tie into other products, i.e. it matches or works well with other items that they've already purchased. So there's this element of customer delight, which we can use in our favor if we're an organization that's pricing. So we're looking to create that additional value above and beyond sort of the price that they're willing to pay. We need to be creating value for our employees down here. So we need to make sure that there's employee satisfaction. So if your strategic initiative gives your employees satisfaction, there's a few ways in which you're going to be able to manage or map that, and some of that is going to be making sure that your employees are responsible for the creation of your strategic initiatives. You don't need to sit, if you're a business leader, there's often this case that, well, I need to lead, don't I? I need to be out in front, I need to be demonstrating all of these things. Well, guess what? In the new, more complex world, collaboration, being a collaborative leader is going to be increasingly important. And part of that collaboration is around ensuring that your employees are part of your design of your strategy. And let's not forget our suppliers down the bottom here. Really, really important. And if nothing else in the last 12 months, those who are reliant on a supply chain, as most organizations will be, whether you're a key component of someone else's supply chain or whether you're reliant on a consistent supply chain, making sure your suppliers are happy. You need to create value for your suppliers. So when you're buying from them or engaging with them, looking for opportunities to reduce their operating costs, so the way in which they supply to you. And some of that may involve sustainability and looking at things like packaging, for example, and methods of distribution that are more in keeping with sustainable development goals. Okay, I noticed there's 4 things in the chat. Molly, was there anything, other questions? Or that's fine if there isn't. I haven't stopped to look. Apologies for that.
Sorry, I was still on mute there.
Yeah.
Just a couple of comments just saying really fascinating, love the idea of collaboration, and just really agreeing with what you're saying and saying a huge thank you. Good.
Well, I'm glad it's, you know, this is all about us trying to make sense of the world we're in, isn't it? And I think that like I said at the start, ordinarily, if this was a workshop scenario for me, and that takes more time, we would sort of be digging into some of these elements, and certainly on our, like I do with our MBA students, you know, we'd be saying, what does this mean for me? How do I make this work? Particularly if a lot of them are work-based learners, so you know, they're in very relevant situations at that point in time. Now, the example I've got on screen here, Best Buy is not someone we're familiar with usually, unless you've spent some time in the US or Canada. But the Harvard Business Review is an American publication. Naturally, they're going to talk about organizations, but Best Buy are really a sort of a value store. So they have a big, large physical network of shops, stores in the US, Canada, and people will go there, and I think it's probably akin to, I don't think we have something quite the same in the UK anymore, but perhaps it would be something along the lines of not quite home bargains even. I'm just trying to think of some of the wholesale, and I've forgotten the name of the one that I've been to in London, but anyway, there's some big wholesale, Costco, that type of thing. So but on more of a high street, but in the US obviously they don't have the high street. We're talking about malls, and you know, but they're based in towns and cities. And basically what they were faced with was this huge challenge from online and low-cost rivals, other rivals that were faster moving and smaller, didn't have this liability of a large physical network of shops, which had a falling customer share and falling footfall because people were choosing to purchase online. So what Best Buy did was undergo a transformation, and they started to they looked at where their big cost base was. It was their physical stores. They were becoming an increasing liability. So Costco said, hang on a minute, we need to make use of these physical stores in a better way and turn them into an asset. So what it did was it looked to its suppliers and its supply chain and started to develop stores within the store. So essentially, and when I think about the UK, I think about something like Sainsbury's. I don't know if anyone's used to Sainsbury's lately, but I was surprised to see, and locally I went to the very large one that's in Ashford last week, and not only do Sainsbury's often have, and the Canterbury one has a Starbucks in it, not only do they have some sort of food drink provider that they've partnered with, they're now also partnering with people like Argos. So Argos have a presence. You can go and pick up your Argos product from within, or order from within the Sainsbury's store in Faversham. So apologies for anyone outside of Kent or East Kent, this is very localized. And when you go to the Ashford store, you can now buy products from Habitat, who had a presence, you know, sort of in the 80s and 90s, a presence across a lot of our towns and cities in terms of bricks and mortar shops, but underwent some financial challenges and have sort of shrunk back to very few of those. But what they have done, and what Sainsbury's have very cleverly done, is said, well, actually, Sainsbury's are like, well, we have a large presence, a retail. Our buildings tend to be very large. Let's make sure that we're maximizing the opportunities within that environment. And this is where, coming back to the question earlier about where are the compelling stories? And it's often stories, and I'm a great fan of stories in business, because there are lots of stories out there that can demonstrate how this works well. Okay. So moving on from that, but you can take a closer look at that. And if you draw out the stick on your bit of paper in front of you, you've got your willingness to pay, you know what your customer, your price is, you know what your cost price is, and you know your supply chain. So have a think about where value is created in all of that end to end. And that's really your value chain or your value stream. So another way of representing it.
Just another question here, Kate.
Yep.
Steph asked,
Gonna get a drink.
Is the HBR info on value creation opportunity in the actual publication rather than on the web?
It probably, knowing HBR, it's probably within their publication. They do, if you go to their website, there will be a taster of it. That's normally how they operate. So there'll be a shortened version of the article. Because they very wisely have a foot in both camps. You know, they know that subscription services is where they still make a lot of money, but if they don't get their info out there on the web and get people interested, nobody's going to go and buy further. So that's what they do. So you should be able to find some information on this on their website. And I don't know, Molly, if normally the slide sets from these are shared, because I'm obviously more than happy for that to happen. I can share that with Molly.
And so, then yeah, we will send those out to everyone for you.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So hopefully that will give you access. Okay, so I wanted to come back to some sort of simple terms, and because I'm conscious that because I don't know all of you and know your businesses or sort of the stage at which you're at in your business journey, you know, sometimes the thought of sitting down and planning strategy is just one of those things that goes on the to-do list. But just some pointers that I've learned over time, and particularly for those smaller groups, make sure it's about your team and get a workshop on your calendar, set aside some time. Has been a luxury in the last 12 months. We've either had too much time, actually, some people have had too much, I would rather not have done. And then there's plenty of people for whom it has been running to stand still. So get some time on your calendar. If you have a larger group of people, if there's more than just a few of you, and you want to be part of this, and I would suggest if you are a business leader or a business owner, you definitely want to be part of it. Use a facilitator if you have some funds, often not expensive, but that means that you can get involved, and so that you can be part of the design of the strategy. You can work with your teams. You can hear, if you're part of a larger organization, you can start to listen in and move from table to table. So your role is no longer just sort of instigating the workshop, but it's about you participating yourself, and this is where collaboration can really start to get some momentum. So create the right environment. I mean, again, we sit down, if someone says to me, okay, we need to write a strategy for where this company's going, you know, it's all head in the hands time, because, you know, my brain hurts and everything seems complicated. There's lots of techniques out there, and I've used some of them before in workshops where we are talking, we start off with just a creative activity, and it can be simplistic, and this always sounds odd, but and I do this with students often as well, is that, you know, get a box of Lego. Everyone's got a bit of Lego. Design a new entrance to the building using Lego. What should it look like? And if you've got Lego figures, everyone starts to, instead of focusing on the problems and getting really buried in the detail, everybody can take a step back and go, well, yeah, I'm just going to use my brain a bit more creatively now. And it takes the pressure off, because what you really want to happen is that a workshop like this is about creativity, because having teams together, time's quite precious, and if there's a tendency to fall back on what we already know, and in which case it's hard to get the sorts of innovation. And if you're thinking about your strategy, of course you want it to contain some elements of innovation, as long as it's innovation that's going to deliver some value. Simple tools like SWOT analysis. I think I've got a slide coming up on SWOT. Again, I don't want to assume everybody knows how to use SWOT, and everybody, you know, it gets talked about a lot, and I think SWOT's just useful. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'll come on to that slide in a sec. Another acronym here is PASTEL. If SWOT is about thinking about our organization internally and looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, PASTEL is about looking outwards and looking to, and the acronym stands for political, environmental, economic, and I've forgotten the rest already, technological, legal. What are the environments in which we're working? and social, of course, which is the S in the middle. But what are the environments? What's happening out there in the environment? So an eye to the outside and an eye to the inside is always a good technique for working on your strategy. And you can build on existing. I've mentioned this, but don't just sit with the same set, excuse me, of priorities and expect innovation. I'm just going to get a drink. Sorry, that's hay fever. Okay, so what do you need? Of course, you need data, lots of data when you're creating strategy and making better use of the data that your organization has. So when you're looking to your external environment and you want to focus on certain markets, what do you know about those markets? There's always a lot of we think and I think and so on. Can you get yourself a good coherent data set that you could rely on? So when you're picking strategic objectives and you're looking for value, do you have the figures at your fingertips? Do you know which elements of your organization, which areas create the most value? So having that data to hand is good. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about, try and stop coughing. I'm going to talk a bit about how you get some of these elements to work in practice. I'm going to switch my pointer off because it seems to be, my laptop's not liking it at the moment. Let's switch that off. Okay, so strengths, SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So do this at the start of your strategy planning process. And I've said on here, use your entire leadership team. Now, if you're a company of 3 people or 2 people, that is, you are the leadership team. If you're a much larger organization, then, you don't want everybody to be occupied with strategy all the time. So you might pick some key leaders that that will engage with their own teams and bring that sort of holistic view to the table when you're thinking about what's out there. And capturing the output is always really important because there's a lot of talk that happens, but being able to, and this is where when I mentioned before about facilitation, it can be really useful to have somebody who's perhaps not embedded in the organization picking out, well, what are the key points from what you've just said, pulling out from the discussions that happen. And then you're looking to be able to use this to create some sort of map or a diagram. I'm not going to talk about this one a lot. This was just and I thought it might be useful because when we're thinking about strategy and horizons, and we've talked about short, mid, and long term, I'm missing a bracket there. McKinsey did come up, and this was during the middle of the COVID pandemic, came up with this particular grid as a suggestion for how organisations should be planning. The idea being that because we're in a crisis state, that the planning should happen in very short term. And this is where we come back to like the sprints and the scrums and where the agile stuff would work quite well. So what are you planning for this week? And it was literally as much as that. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this when things were changing very quickly. How do we plan for this week? How do we plan for the next 2 to 4 weeks? So they came up with this idea of using these 5 frames. And on the left here are the things you should be talking about in your plan. So if you're planning for the next week, what scenarios do we think, what issues and opportunities are going to come up in the next week? What's the broad direction of travel for this week? So really, I mean, for those who've been involved in strategy management over the years, this would be really unfamiliar. When we're thinking about strategy, we don't think about this week and 2 to 4 weeks. That's all tactical, surely. But because of the pace of change, it required strategy, it required a strategic approach. And this particular diagram here, I wanted to show you, again, coming back to this agile and what does iterative planning mean? How do we make that work? McKinsey, this is part of McKinsey's 5 frames as well. but I thought it would be useful for those of you who are thinking, I don't want to be setting a huge strategy right at this point in time, but I think I do need a 6-month strategy. I do need something that sits underneath our overall framework. We're not going to rewrite what's, what our 5-year plan is, for example, but what we might do is rewrite what that means for the next 6 months. And McKinsey suggested these elements. And the one I really liked was get a realistic view of your starting position. And it's often been difficult in the last 12 months. And I'm sure that we're going to face some of this in the next 12 months, is where are we right now, sort of taking stock, that idea of if we're planning for the next 2 to 4 weeks, the next 2 months, the next 6 months, do we know where we are right now? And again, data helps. Having a good, clear access to data and intelligence about where your organization is good. And they sound like fancy words. If there's just a few of you in your organization, it's digging out, what did we sell in the last week, the last 2 weeks? How many customers did we serve, and so on. It's as simple as that, but it's taking that time out to look at those and base decisions and plans on that information. So, and I talked about taming complexity earlier, and this is a phrase that gets used, but actually complexity is starting to offer us something. If we can respond to complexity in our business environments, what we can start to see is that we, in growing businesses on a modular basis, we can pull parts of the business in and out. When environments are complex, there's often a niche that can suit, instead of being a simple, large-scale operating environment. Perhaps there's challenges that have happened that have meant the larger organizations have started to dissolve and fade, and that if you're a small and agile business, you can start to take advantage of that. So complexity can offer opportunity, but it offers opportunity where we are able to take advantage of it, and that's all about looking to understand how we create value and how we build that into our business model. Okay, I've stopped coughing at last, thank goodness. Right, so we've covered a lot of ground already. You guys are probably, your heads are spinning at this point. But it's all important. It's important because what we're interested in is looking at how we take complexity and we decide on our strategic direction. Where are we going? What's our third horizon looking like? Whether the third horizon is just in a year or whether the third horizon is in 5 years. And I borrow a lot, make no apologies for borrowing from McKinsey largely for this particular session today. They've got a lot of good and useful stuff to say. So thinking about what's happened in the last 12 months and crisis situations. So if we take the bottom left-hand side of this grid, what McKinsey are saying is the depth and length of our industry, just close that window, demand disruption. We've all faced lots and lots of disruption. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter if you're an institution, a public agency, a small business. Hardly anybody has had not very much disruption and it being short-lived. It's all been disruptive, pretty much, almost without exception, whether that's a positive disruption because all of a sudden you're very much busier than you were. You sell a product that, or you've broken into a marketplace that you weren't in before as a result. Or you have faced a lengthy disruption that has completely interrupted your current business operating model. So you're, as a business or as a business leader, are going to start to think about, what are you going to do? Some of these you may have already done. You may have already shifted your business model. You may have taken a look at what you were doing and it was not something that was sustainable. If you worked in some of the sort of hospitality sector, it could be that you were saying, well, actually, I'm going to have to shape a new business out of this, even in the short term or the longer term. Or perhaps you're going to restructure. You've taken the opportunity during the lengthy disruption to say, I'm going to restructure how I'm doing things. Perhaps you've taken a look at the value, whereas the elements that have created value. And lots of people would have been in the area where they would be just get the pointer out again. Sustaining the business and restoring operations. Lots of the focus around keeping things moving, keeping things going, and looking ahead to how we restore activity again. So in thinking about the business model, I've got a short video that I wanted to show you, and I'm hoping it's all going to work and you're going to be able to hear it. I mentioned earlier the business model canvas. I've got one of them behind me here. It's a fantastic tool. A guy called Alex Osterwalder and his partner designed this some years ago. What they were interested in was creating visual tools that organizations could use to understand what it is that they do. And some of this is really useful. If you can create a business model canvas for your business, not only does it help you share across your business sort of what the model is, this is how we work, this is what we're about. It can be really useful for telling your story to others if you're looking to get into partnerships with others, other organizations, or if you're looking for finance or you're seeking investment, being able to very quickly enable others to understand what it is you do and where you create value can be a very powerful tool. I was going to switch off the pointer. So I've got a short video. It says, I think the first one's just 3 minutes. I'm going to press play and hopefully it will work. And from this, I want you to be thinking about how you start to generate from your ideas, how you start to move that into a business model. Here we go.
We just need to, just change the way that we're sharing screen.
Her friend Carl.
Is that working, Molly?
And an idea.
Sorry, I've just hit stop share. It's just because when we've shared screen there, you've shared in PowerPoint, but if you can share your desktop, if that's
okay. Sure.
Success is far from assured.
Okay.
That's because for every great idea that has shaped our world, there are thousands of seemingly great ideas that have flopped. In order to succeed, a great business idea needs a great business model, and they're not the same thing. Once your idea meets the world, it will meet customers. If they don't care about the problem your idea solves for them, it's game over. But even if customers love your value proposition, you can fail if your business model is not scalable and financially sustainable. You'll need to find reliable channels to reach and acquire your customers. You'll need to build an infrastructure that won't collapse as your business begins to grow. Failing to do just one of these things can mean death to your business, however great your idea is. That's why your first work is to search for the right business model, to map this world of challenges so it can be tamed and organized, allowing you to explore it, manage it, and plan for it. What if there was a tool that could help you with this challenge, simply and visually? A tool that makes it easier to stress test your ideas, track your progress, and avoid breaking the bank along the way. What if it was possible to design and test business models in a way that gives your idea a better shot at rising to the level of the great businesses that are shaping our world? It is, and though the journey for these guys, and for you, won't be a walk in the park, all you'll need is your creativity, willingness to work, and passion for your idea. We'll give you the rest.
Okay, hopefully that's stopped now. I'll go back to the presentation. So, so in creating the business model canvas, hold on, so I'll just stop that. So go into automatic play mode. I do want to play you this one though. But thinking about this idea of a strategy and setting future strategy, we're in the position where once you have your business idea and you start to create and think about your business model, you can use the business model canvas tool to do that. And I have got in a later slide a link to the website where you can go. It's a free download, the business model canvas. And obviously at the moment we're all working remotely, but I would suggest that if you can print it out, you print it out, and you can also use it as a slide in PowerPoint and have your team work on it remotely, which is what I've had to do in certain instances recently. I've really missed the post-its. I don't know about anybody else. I'll be glad to get back in a room and use post-its everywhere. So what the business model canvas does is, so it's this idea, it's creating a shared language. So excuse me. So if the you have an existing business model, so it's not always about new ideas. Some of it will be about new ideas, but it could also be about your existing business model. Do you know what your existing business model is? If I was to say to you, so tell me about your business model, what is it based on? The canvas allows you to map out what your business model is currently, or if you're designing a new business, you have a new idea for a business, you're starting to perhaps go into some blue ocean territory, mapping out with your team or your partners what that looks like using the canvas. It can be a really collaborative and worthwhile experience. So the canvas itself covers these 4 main areas. I've got another short video to show you that it describes it in a bit better detail, and the video is produced by Strategizer, which is the organization that Alex Osterwalder, the designer of the business model canvas, runs. So these are straight from the experts, but visually a really good work. They describe it better than I could myself, that's for sure. So the business model canvas does cover sort of the 4 main areas of any business. So we have your customers. There's elements of the canvas that talk about, get you to explain what you're doing with your customers. There's an explanation of your offer. What is the offer? Something around your infrastructure, your back of house, what's happening, what do you do in your business to support the other elements, and something about financial viability. So I'm not going to jump off. I was going to go back to my slide set, but seeing as I've got full screen here, I'm not going to jeopardize that. I'm going to press play on the next video, which is visualizing your business model using the canvas.
I think we still need to share screen at the moment. I'm not sure if we can't see the video at the moment.
Is that not working? Okay. Let me just come back out. Oh, apologies. Let's just stop that. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's playing. Sorry, it's playing from the PowerPoint. So when it's on full screen, I can't see that. Okay. So what we need to do is what I did before. So let's make this bigger, and then I'll do share screen.
Zoom can be so confusing.
Yeah, it's just jumping between the 2 things, isn't it? Yeah. So hopefully this does the trick, and let me press play again. I'll go back.
Perfect.
This is the business model canvas. It's just what Beth and Carl will need to craft a powerful business model, and it can do the same for you. Let's dive in and see how it works. There are 9 essential building blocks that make up any business model. When you get all 9 blocks working together, you'll have answered the fundamental questions any business model must solve. We'll start here with customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. Channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. The customer relationships outline the types of relationships you're establishing with your customers and how you're acquiring and retaining them. Pricing mechanisms through which your business model captures value are documented under revenue streams. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model, so you can describe the infrastructure you need to create, deliver, and capture value. The key activities show which things you need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. And once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. Any business model can be mapped this way: 9 building blocks working to reinforce and strengthen each other. But before you make a model for yourself, it helps to see what a breakthrough business model looks like in action. like this one. Low-cost airlines revolutionized air travel thanks to their disruptive business model. Let's first look at their value proposition. A low-cost airline offers ultra-cheap flights to their main customer segment, budget travelers, by adopting a no-frills policy. And this leads to additional revenue streams because customers pay for their ticket and additional fees on items like food and drink, priority boarding, and luggage. The airlines save even more money through their choice of channels, selling only through call centers and the internet, making for efficient, if not always convenient, customer relationships that are automated and often impersonal. Okay, that covers the right side of the canvas, the part everyone can see. The left side of the canvas is what's going on backstage. Like their choice of key resources, they reduce maintenance and training costs by using a single aircraft model for the whole fleet. And they only fly to cheap airports where it's cost efficient to land or where they even get paid to touch down. Planes that do land have quick turnarounds, so they get back in the air earning money as quickly as possible. And they form key partnerships with others in the travel industry, like car rental, hotel, and insurance companies. Finally, under cost structures, all maintenance, training, airport, and call center costs are trimmed to their lowest levels. All of these pieces working together make their fares almost impossible for traditional airlines to compete with. There's nothing superior about these airlines except their business models. They're reaching an entirely new segment of travelers out of reach for traditional airlines. Cutting out costs is pretty exciting, right? But wait, just because it's successful for discount airlines doesn't mean it will work for your idea. Luckily, the business model canvas allows you to iterate many models and test them quickly. Let's get started with your own business idea.
Okay, I think I've stopped that. Yeah. Okay, good. Just go back to the slides. We're close to oh goodness, okay, sorry. I had trouble with sharing sound as well. Let me stop it. There we are. That's better. Okay, good. Let's go back to share screen. We've all become rather more used to talking ourselves through these things. So let's share and let's go to where we were. I can skip over that. So, okay. So interesting. That's the business model canvas. Those two clips that I showed are available on YouTube. Or if you go to the Strategyzer website, either look at their YouTube channel or go to their website if you want to take another look at them. And I've also got some other materials on there about how to use the business model canvas in different contexts. Particularly, they offer a number of canvases actually, and some of you may find this interesting because when you're looking at the business model canvas, the sort of core element, the value proposition in the middle, actually breaking that down into what your value proposition is. They offer another canvas, which again is just a visual tool. It's just got elements to it. You use Post-its, you get the team together, and you start to map out what your value proposition is. And I would suggest that that could be really useful as part of understanding your value initiatives that are going to form part of your strategy. We talked earlier about making sure that you only have initiatives that are delivering value. So it could be a really nice, a neat link into designing your strategy as well. So that's the email address there. I think I can copy and paste it from here. No. Oops. Let's go back one. Anyway, if you go to strategyzer.com/canvas, that will take you to the range of canvases that they offer, which you can, like I said, you can download for free. Interesting model that even Strategyzer themselves are operating on. So they offer lots of what perhaps other organizations might think of as their sort of core intellectual property. They offer that for free for anybody to use. And as a result, there's sort of widespread uptake, and the other services that they do offer that are paid for services, like the sort of training, coaching and things like that, are where they generate their revenues from. But it's quite a neat business model in itself, and increasingly more common as well. Okay, so We've just watched that video. So for you guys, all of you who've attended today, and I thank you for listening. It's been a lot of talking from me. The next steps for you, I think that mapping out your business model will be an invaluable part of determining your strategy for the future. If you already have a strategy that you're perfectly happy with, then the business model perhaps would just serve as a really good illustration for sharing with other team members, and like I said before, even investors or new collaborative partnerships, people that you're talking to outside of your organization. And it can sometimes be a really good way of kind of synthesizing for yourself, particularly if you are an owner or operator and you've been running your organization for some time, your business. Just go, what do I do? What is it that I'm selling here that's working? What is the value we're creating? And who do I work with? Who are my key partners? Am I paying them enough attention? Who are my key suppliers? And what are my key sources of revenue? Okay. So finally, before I finish, and I think this should get to work, I'm just going to go on. I'm going to come back to the YouTuber, because I found this video when I was doing some creating a session for some students some weeks ago, and it answered a question for me. I mean, perhaps some of the generation that doesn't understand, but what is the business model of a YouTuber? How on earth do people make money? How does it work? It's really interesting. So I'll come back to that in a sec, because I'm going to have to stop and share screen again. So what I wanted to do was just take you through the last few slides that I have here. One of these I thought you might find useful. And again, if the PowerPoint's shared, you'll be able to have a look at this, because some of you may be in a position where you're working in a consultancy type organization, or you own a manager, a consultancy type organization, and this is a fully mapped out business model canvas for that type of organization. So as you can see here, this is typed in, it's not got post-its on it. So you can use the canvas in this way with your teams if everyone is still remote. But it does give you some detail around what the value proposition is, and and if it can be neatly summarized. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to summarize. But the action or the activity of doing so can really bring some focus. I think that understanding things like your channels to business, and channels are talked about a lot, and you'll hear phrases like omni-channel, channel sales, and so on. But really all that is about how you reach your customers. What are the methods that you're using in order to access them? And again, stopping and thinking about what those channels are. And if you're looking at, you have many channels that you have got open, but you're not really getting any value generated through that, it can be an opportunity to look at what areas you might want to change, and what in creating a canvas of your existing business model. And like it said on the video, guess what? Create your existing business model, and then get out a fresh new canvas, fresh A4, A3, bigger than that even, and start to map out what your future business model, what do you think your business model will look like in 12 months, and it will start to enable you to think about how you get from here to here, and do that as a team as well. Okay, so what's your plan for action? How are you going to take some of the tools and techniques I've talked to you about this morning, and your understanding of complexity, and what role complexity and agility of your organization can play in enabling your strategy, and how there can be some opportunity within what seems like a chaotic operating environment, and how you're going to capture those opportunities and make them solid. Okay. So just wanted to talk to you briefly at the end, because it would be remiss of me not to do so. Obviously, I've talked about the fact that I work for Christchurch Business School. I wanted to give you a little bit about detail about how our organisation is working with businesses currently, and is seeking to work with businesses in future. So we have a number of areas where we work with local and national organisations, actually, in some instances. I know with the GradForce in the previous webinars, there's been a look at how the sort of talented students that we're producing at the moment are starting to emerge from our organisation, how they can assist you with your business and your business operating model. And even students, in fact, we quite often we do work with businesses where we have students in certain areas within the business school who to undertake projects working with local organisations, and they can be a really good cross partnership working collaboration that can happen there, because the young people well, they're not all young people, all ages of people, but the students that we have within our organisation have a range of experiences. Some of them bring a lot of experience to the table already, but perhaps have returned to study for a variety of reasons. But there's opportunities to work with students and to utilise and access some of the skill sets that our students have. We also have the Kent and Medway Edge Hub, which are based out of our fantastic new building, our fantastic new STEM building on the Canterbury campus. Lots of opportunities for collaboration with expertise and insight on how businesses work, based around some of the key themes that our Edge Hub are working with, things like strategic transformation, some of the stuff we've been talking about today, about digitalisation, how we enable our organisations to be ready for what industry 4.0, they're talking about 5.0, sort of beyond digital, what comes next, and how you can benefit from that. Decarbonisation, which surrounds obviously sustainable development goals, and advanced manufacturing. There's lots. Our new building offers a state-of-the-art facility for manufacturing and making and prototyping, and lots of expertise involved in that. Not least, and this is where my interest comes in, our degree apprenticeship programs. For those of you who aren't so familiar with the higher level apprenticeships, at Christchurch we run a number of programs. The Chartered Manager, that's the Chartered Manager degree apprenticeship program, which employers can access, and that includes the small medium-sized employers now, and some not-for-profit sectors can access business degree courses and programs for bringing on their own talents. So where you have individuals who you think would benefit from that, or even at a senior level, part of our new MBA program involves some senior level apprenticeship activity. And beyond that, we offer short courses and summer schools. So I have some connections here, some links here that will take you through to accessing some more information on our websites for that. Of course, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, Kate Keane. I'm on there if you find me. I'm more than interested in connecting with people who are business owners and operators within our regional area. And we're looking forward to, in September 2021, to having what we're calling an Accelerate conference with businesses, with some focus on the key innovation drivers that I mentioned earlier, like digitalisation and so on. Okay, so that's some information about Christchurch Business School. There may be something of interest there to some of you, but always happy to have conversations. And the more support and access we can give companies, small, medium-sized companies, into some of the skills and expertise that we have within the business school, the better. Okay, so just to finish up, what I wanted to do was return to the YouTuber. Now, this is a mystery to me. How do these people make money? How does it work? Some of you are probably much more familiar with this. But when I came across this video, I thought, this is great. It involves a bit of the business model canvas as well. So I'm just going to return to it, and I think I will probably have to do a new share. So if I press play, and then I'll have to stop it and close it. I'm getting used to this now. I'm just going to pause there, and I'm going to do.
Hey Sam, how's it going?
Right, let's do a new share.
Good, yeah, I'm good, man. Just had me pizza, so I'm feeling good.
And that's not the only reason why Sam's
Hopefully
feeling
that's
good.
working, Molly.
He's now gone all in on YouTube, making videos full time. But he started with just 1,000 subscribers and was still being able to make a living. How did he do it? Let's find out. And we're going to use Strategize's business model canvas to break down his business model and understand his story a little bit better. So Sam's value proposition is based off of camera gear reviews and tutorials. But how did he get into it?
As I was learning things and searching for techniques on YouTube, a lot of the things that I wanted to find out weren't actually accessible or available on YouTube. So I thought every time I learned something, I wanted to share it with other people.
Fantastic. So you started with the idea of bringing people value and helping them.
Yeah.
But specifically in a niche that you knew something about.
Yeah, a little bit about.
So Sam shared a really good point about starting a business and a YouTube channel.
It's got to be about something that you're passionate about, otherwise it'll never work. Because A, people see through that, and B, you won't be able to sustain it if you don't enjoy it. You don't have to be the best, because you can learn as you go along, and you can share what you're learning.
So that's super interesting. Sam's customer segment were content creators like Sam who were not quite as far along on the journey as him, but he was still able to help them by bringing them value about things that he just learned himself. Really cool. So Sam has two main channels right now, YouTube and Instagram.
Nowadays, more than ever, it's great to have a social media presence in the form of Instagram or YouTube or whatever it is to get you across to help market your business.
Now, probably the best way to describe the customer relationship is that his subscribers, his customers, are fans, and so they have an emotional connection with him. And if you look through his comments, well, he just gets loads of them, and he gets lots of really positive feedback from people. So it's definitely kind of like a fan relationship. And so whenever he's got anything to sell, they don't even think about it. They just buy it because they're like, oh yeah, Sam's got this thing. I'm going to pay for it. Of course I am, because I'm a fan. That's really important. Sam also made a really good point about how YouTube can help traditional service-based businesses create deeper connections with their customers.
I think a service-based business is the easiest business to start because you're providing a service, something that somebody wants. So, you can market yourself as that. But if you've got a YouTube channel or an Instagram page alongside that and you're showing your personality, people like people. So if they see you, they're going to think, oh, I need my car cleaning, so I'm going to hire Sam to clean my car. Or I want a wedding filming, so I've seen that Sam does it.
So the part of Sam's business model that's most interesting are his revenue streams. But before we talk about those, I'm going to get some tea. So let's talk about Sam's revenue streams. The first one is YouTube AdSense. So he gets paid every time YouTube plays an ad on one of his videos. The second one is that he sells his LUTs and presets on his website so that people can make their content look like his. And then you've got the third one, which is Amazon affiliates. So he does a lot of kind of gear reviews, and then he posts in the description of the YouTube videos links to Amazon to buy them, and then he gets a cut if you then click on them and buy anything from Amazon. So those are his revenue streams right now. But think about all the possibilities that he's got for the future, because he could sell merchandise, or he could do licensing like Mr. Beast did with Mr. Beast Burger. And I know Peter McKinnon is doing it too, who is a big inspiration of Sam's, but also myself. So there's huge potential in the revenue streams box for the business model canvas for Sam. In fact, if you've got any ideas for new revenue streams that Sam might like to try out, why not share them in the comments below? Let us know. I'm sure Sam would really appreciate it. Now, let's talk about the back end of Sam's business model. So in terms of the key resources, there's only really one, which is the camera gear, which is super expensive. But Sam's done something really clever because he partners with brands like Hire a Camera who can lend him the equipment, which enables him to do the key activity of filming and editing his videos. And often they're about gear as well, which make it even more important. Now, the last box on Sam's business model canvas is the cost structure. Now, for him, it's not that complicated because he's actually getting a lot of the equipment via his partners, so he hasn't got huge gear costs. What's more important is his salary, so that's probably the main cost that we put for him. So there you go, everybody. That was Sam's business model. I found it fascinating mapping it out and speaking to Sam. I hope you did too.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there. Okay, I think that's probably enough. And I could see I just had a chance while we were watching that just to go and have a look at the chat and see what else has been said. So I can see there's lots of good things discussions going on there. So apologies that I've not been able to refer to them too often. It seemed like it was a step too far for my technical capabilities on Zoom. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation this morning. Now, I hope it's been useful. I know it was intensely PowerPoint slide related, so hopefully you've all been able to take something away from it. You've been able to start to scribble out what actions you're thinking about taking for your own or within your own organisation. So I'm going to hand back to Molly now, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to also take those before we finish.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And it's been so lovely to see really nice positive comments in the chat there as well. So a fantastic session. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I don't know if anyone does have any questions at all. If so, feel free to unmute or pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we will send a copy of the slides out by email later this afternoon. And a massive thank you for everyone for joining us. Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.